So I've been preparing a lecture for Savi Sawakar. He's a painter here in India. We worked together a year and a half ago, and I presented a dance to Nina Simone's Four Women based on what I was inspired by in some of his paintings. So we're working together again, and a lot of the theme of his paintings are Dalits. He's a Dalit person, untouchable, as you could say. And the theme, it's a theme in his work in so much as he reflects the lives of Dalit people. And I know to a lot of that distinction is very interesting because just as we look at black arts and the black aesthetic, it's not that people are talking about being black and that the entity of black studies is looking at being black. That's actually from the outsider's perspective. But from the insider's perspective, what we look at and what I look at in my work, be it my written work, be it my blogs, be it my performances, and looking, for example, at Four Women, I showed my impression based on black women I knew and the words that came to me, and the music and the melody and that tension that's always there in soul music between the suffering and the pain as well as the joy and the potential and the unwillingness to be defined by one's suffering, which again I find very Buddhist, but I also say that that's a more of an interesting narrative to present to me as a performer to an audience. And here's why, and this is where Dr. Dyson's work, Open Mic, really came in. Because he's in this chapter, he's really talking about, he starts with talking about what it is to have an oral tradition. And he talks about how the oral tradition, as opposed to what I could add, a textual-based tradition where you have a lay of the law, and accuracy is the most important characteristic of such a language. But the oral tradition, which very much is steeped in the African tradition is an oral tradition, and it's transmitted through orality. And he's talking about this, and of course he uses whooping, pre-black Southern preachers whooping, as a specific sort of oral narrative, a tool that people employ, a rhetorical tool that people employ. But he also talks about the idea that learning about life through narratives, through parables, through proverbs, back to an African understanding of an oral tradition, that learning about such narratives is actually what characterizes a racial experience. For him, he says it's racial. For me, I say it's more rooted in an African tradition. But he's sort of measuring it against the dominant European tradition. And in this chapter, he goes on to talk about how can you use European traditions to talk about black identity? Can you use European theory, by Foucault, by Judith Butler, I would add, that comes out of a whitening tradition, where white identity is more about whitewashing, by removing difference and sanitizing difference. But that's not what the experience that he is talking about here is. And he's saying that difference really does come from that difference in oral tradition versus the textual tradition, because in an oral tradition, as opposed to accuracy is their main aim, he's talking about it encourages interpretation of faith in the light of reasoned articulation of the grounds of belief. The hermeneutic ubiquity suggests how black religious narratives shape the interpretive activities of believers in a secular, intellectual, and cultural environments. And he goes on and on and on to talk about an oral tradition. Listen to this now. An oral tradition facilitates the remix. So this is a narrative that I would add, that what we have as a cultural trope in black music, this idea of digging back and remixing and remaking songs, and with the specific emphasis on interpretation. What is your individual interpretation of that music, that song? So you look at Mariah, remix queen, right? What is her interpretation? If you think you're lonely now, wait until tonight. Girl, I'm feeling out of my element, throwing things crying. That remix, that he's identifying that as a direct result of not just an oral tradition, but the means of an oral tradition. And this is what I want to get back to, is that the interactive character of black worship exerts a profound rhetorical pressure on the preacher to integrate into her sermon hermeneutical gestures, semiotic cues, and linguistic opportunities that evoke a verbal response and vocal validation from the congregation. What he's saying is that in this call and response, the tradition of call and response, because it's interactive, it says it facilitates that the speaker provide for the space of interaction, but that they're also, it means that they're listening to those whom they're interacting with, that they're in harmony, in sync. So it's not this sort of didactic presentation of, here is the truth, and it's written down, and it's literally inscribed in stone, like the Ten Commandments, and then everything else that comes after that is a transgression. So anything that's different from this is transgressive. Anything that counters this is dissidence. What he's saying is that that's a textual worldview. The oral worldview says, no, difference is in itself a good thing. Difference is in itself produces positive results through this interaction, through this dialogue. And so even when you have a designated leader, whether it be a person on the mic at the pulpit or a person on the mic in front of the in front of Mixmaster Jay, that person, due to the dialogue that they're having with the audience, they are called upon to then witness about these things. And so what I was thinking of using, and I love that, let me just make sure this is still recording. I love that Dr. Dyson reminded us of his, not just his roots in the church and how the church is one side of this, and he doesn't sort of root this to Christianity per se, but he roots this through a tradition, and that's why my emphasis is more on the African traditions that you see through black liberation theology in America. And again, as I always remind us, you can see this in Islam, in black people practicing Islam, practicing Buddhism, as I do. But you see this performance of faith, dramatization of devotion, and the behaving of belief. So it's not enough to just preach. And it's not enough to just have it in certain segments and segmentations and sort of segment off and compartmentalize your life. But it's saying that our belief is that it's interactive with the world around us, including the people, but also that we have to demonstrate our faith and not just preach it. As a matter of fact, maybe not even preach it in that sense, but demonstrate it. And this is all what comes out of an oral tradition. Performative epistemology accents the engaged, humane, and political character of religious curiosity. And this is important. Linking the experience of knowing and loving God, where he talks about knowing and loving God is rooted in the faithful assertion of a cognitive and personal relationship with the supreme supernatural being. So sort of an acknowledgement that there is more than meets the eye. So again, it's not tied to a Christian understanding of God, but knowing God and loving human beings. So therefore, black religious discourse suggests that it is difficult and indeed morally noxious to know God and to not do right in the world. So you cannot just witness injustice and not do something. You have the responsibility, the moral responsibility to speak up. And this is, again, all coming from the oral tradition. I love it.